All right, greetings everybody. Welcome. As always, we would like to give you all a warm welcome to today's show. I'm your host, of course, Faith, and you're hanging out with us live on Her Story Too. I'm glad, as always, and we are honored, as always, that you guys hang out with us live on the show in all your avenues. You all hung out with us live, so we're honored. Very honored, really, and really, it's amazing what you guys write to us. As always, we're definitely looking forward to taking your calls, as always. We'd love to hear from you as well. So let me go ahead and give you all the calling number. The calling number is 515-602-9735. That is the number to call. Remember, if you are calling from outside the U.S., you need to dial the U.S. country code and then dial 515-602-9735, and that should get you right in. Okay? That's what you all need to remember. We have listeners from all over the world, everyone. So for those of you who would rather not use this calling number, please go ahead and use the Skype to call option, but make sure that you have a Skype account, and that should be just fine, okay? So go on, make sure you have a Skype account, and then you can use the Skype to call option to call into the show. Okay, everybody? Otherwise, I'd also like to remind you, for those of you who would rather just listen in and chat away with us, that the chat room is now open. So make sure that you come on over and chat away with us. We absolutely enjoy you all in the chat, so feel free to do that as well. If it's your very first time on Blog Talk Radio or on Her Story Too, you need to come over to www.blogtalkradio.com/herstory2, and that is her story, and then TOO, and then simply click on the link that says sign up, and that should get you right in. Okay, everybody. I hope you all had a fantastic week. How are you all doing? I see you all. I'm doing great. Thank you. Today, we have a special guest. Yes. We're going to be chatting away and discussing humanitarian mental health, gender-based violence in conflict areas with none other than expert Dr. Ayesha Ahmad. She will be joining us later. So, you all be in your best behavior. I'm just kidding. Feel free to ask whatever. This platform is really all about education, awareness, inspiration, encouragement, and all that good stuff. That's what we do. So go ahead and prepare your questions for her. Ask anything and everything. We don't have good questions and not so good questions. We just have questions, okay? And feel free to digress. We don't mind, because we know that every question is just as important. So you might think you're digressing. I know somebody told me, but you allow people to digress. I absolutely am aware when we're digressing, okay? But I know that there is a reason why that person is asking that question, and they're here. They know the topic, but they're asking that question. So we accommodate everybody. That's just how we do. We're informal. We're not so formal. We don't have, very fixed rules. We're quite flexible, and we adapt. So that's the answer to somebody who asked me that. Why do I allow people to ask, to make all those diverse comments and questions, because we learn in different ways. That's the response to that. Okay, y'all, welcome once again. For those of you who are just joining us, we want to give you a warm welcome. You are live on Her Story Too, in case you were just passing through Blog Talk and bumped around, bumped on our show. That's what happens sometimes, So just in case that happened, you're hanging out with us live on Her Story Too. And we give you a warm welcome to this platform. For those of you who it's your first time, we have what we like to call our welcome party, okay? And we're about to go into that. But before we go into our welcome party, I'm just going to give you all a little bit of an insight into what we're discussing today, and that is gender-based violence in conflict and humanitarian mental health as well, from a cross-cultural perspective. So we're going to be talking about, different ways of dealing with mental health across different cultures. We're also going to be talking about gender-based violence in extreme settings and in conflict areas. Okay? If you've looked at the state of the world, there is conflict in some parts of the country, in some parts of the world. And what does that lead to? You know, you'll know the answer to that. Instability causes a lot of other social problems, and I'm not going to list them all. But one of them is gender-based violence. One of them is systematic and extreme cases of rape and abuse to women and children. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about that, okay? So we're going to start that discussion right after our welcome party. I'm going to share with you an intro into why cross-cultural informed approaches to dealing with trauma, which we know results from these kind of situations and experiences that people go through. So we're going to talk about ways that cross-cultural awareness and informed approaches to dealing with mental health. Okay? So we're going to do that. And and on that note, we'll go into our welcome party right now. And you all know that's your cue to go grab your water, your juices, your beers, your smoothies, whatever floats your boat. Go ahead and do that. But remember to come back right here. Don't get caught up in your smoothie mix and frenzy and forget that, you were just getting it to have to come, for the show. So we encourage you to go ahead and do that. And so we're going to go into a welcome party. I'm going to play, as you all have noticed, one of my favorite beats, and that is Corey Frazenham, with So Much to Say. And then when we come back, I will share a little bit of an insight from TEDx presentation on how culturally informed approaches dealing with medical health are very important. And this was a presentation about the challenges and rewards of a culturally informed approach to mental health by Jessica Deere. And you can find that on the TEDx. I'm going to play it directly from YouTube. And you'll know how to do. If you can hear me, put a thumbs up. If for some reason you can't hear me, let me know so that I can work through that. Okay? But I think it's important for us to at least get the gist of it before we dive right in. You'll know I love to do that. Help us all get the gist from different perspectives before we dive right in. Okay, so we're going to go into our welcome party, y'all. Get ready to have some fun. And we're going to listen to Corey Frazenham. You'll make sure you go and show them some love, okay? And here we go. Listen in. And after this, we'll be right back.
That would leave me
All right. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. First things first. First things first. As always, y'all, I would like to send out love to each one of you and just really give you all a big, big shout out. Of course, big shout out to you all. And thank you for all your support, as always. So we're going to go ahead and give our shout outs just to recognize all of our listeners from across the world and really thank them for all the support. And we're going to start right here at home, as we always do. So a big shout out and a big thank you goes out to all of our listeners in Norway who show us mud love, and our listeners to Denmark and Finland and Sweden. Thank you all for all your support. Absolutely pleasure and honor. We also want to give a big shout out to the UK, to Germany, to France, to Spain, to Russia, and to Italy. Y'all didn't hear that before, did you? Okay, so big shout out to all of you. We're going to go to Africa. We're going to go to the continent of Africa and give a big shout out to my hometown, Kenya. Big shout out to all our Kenyan listeners. Y'all absolutely rock. Karibu sana. Karibu sana. And you know how we do. Asante sana. And a big shout out to all our fantastic listeners in Ghana. Ghana shows us a lot of mud love. So big up to you all in Ghana and Mali, as well as Ivory Coast. We're going to go to Asia now, I think. We should go to Asia and give a big shout out to Indonesia and all of our listeners in the Philippines, in India, who else is in Asia that we have here? Malaysia as well. Yeah, big up to all our listeners in Asia. We absolutely love you all. And also a big shout out to Australia. Thank you so much for all your support. And Saudi Arabia and Iran. Iran, y'all know the only word I know is boshe, so, mercy. Thank you so much. And finally, we'd love to give a big shout out to all of our listeners in Peru, in Brazil, and in Mexico, Canada, and of course, last but definitely not least, the United States of America. We absolutely love you all. Yeah, so if you're just joining us right now, we're definitely looking to taking your calls as always. You all know you can use the Skype to call in number, but you can also call in directly on the phone lines by calling in 515-602-9735. Please, y'all on the call lines, because some of y'all also have blocked numbers. My cue for you, if you want to talk, is to push 1 on your keypad, and that will be my cue that you want to say something, okay? That's how we do it over here. I also want to remind you all that all our shows are available for you 24/7, so you can actually go back and download, and listen to all our shows anytime you want. So go ahead and do that. So everybody, welcome. We have a special guest today, so you're in for a treat. You're going to get nothing less but an amazing discussion on gender-based violence, humanitarian mental health, cross-cultural informed approaches to dealing with trauma and to dealing with mental health, which I think is extremely important. You all know we live in a diverse world. We're currently all in a global village. So if you all haven't realized that, time to push that wake up button and smell the coffee. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little bit of an intro so that you all can get the gist of things. And then when we come back, we will dive right in. Okay, y'all? So let me know if you can hear me. If you can hear me play this, because I'm playing it directly from YouTube. Okay, y'all? Here we go. Let's go. Let's see.
Thank you. It's truly an honor to be here. I would like to start my talk today with a little exercise, introducing you to a person named Pat. Pat is 31, lives at home with one sibling and their parents. Pat has always lived in the family home and would not consider moving out to live alone, except after getting married. Pat's parents always play a significant role in making decisions about all aspects of Pat's life, including education, work decisions, Pat's friendships, and romantic life. This has been the case since Pat was a child. Pat rarely makes decisions without consulting family members and rarely expresses disagreement with others out of fear of disapproval or loss of support. Pat feels very uncomfortable when alone and tends to cling to others out of fear of being abandoned. Now take a moment to picture Pat. Are you picturing a young man? A young woman? Are you picturing a person of a particular ethnic or cultural background, maybe similar to your own, or different? And consider for a moment whether such information would make a difference in how you think about Pat, and whether or not you think that Pat might have some kind of mental health concern. Now, what if I added
All right. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that intro, and I hope you got something out of that. That was just for you to get a gist of it and to kind of get a basis of why this topic is important, why we're discussing humanitarian mental health, why we're discussing cross-cultural approaches to dealing with mental health and trauma, and why it's important. But what I got from it is that I think it's very important for us to gain awareness of the differences that exist amongst us, which we know obviously exist. We're not all the same, although we are very much the same. But that being said, I think understanding, creating more awareness is important for us to engage and provide the best approaches and eventually, hopefully, the best solutions and treatments for people who have experienced a lot of trauma, people who have been victims, I like to say that in quotes, aka survivors of gender-based violence in conflict areas. And to help us kind of have a better understanding and discuss this further, we have a special guest, and our special guest is Dr. Ayesha Ahmad. And Ayesha Ahmad is a lecturer in global health at St. George's University of London and an honorary lecturer at the Institute for Global Health, University College London, and a PhD in medical ethics. She is here to further help us understand why this is important and also share with us how people's experiences shift in their lives and why it's important to use this kind of approach. Ayesha Ahmad, Dr. Ayesha Ahmad, I see you on the line. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Hello,
good evening. Hello.
Good evening. Excellent. We hear you. We're here with you. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It's an absolute pleasure and an honor to have you on our show. We're absolutely thankful that you accepted our invitation. Welcome, welcome, welcome. For those of you who've just joined us, we have a special guest today, and her name is Dr. Ayesha Ahmad, who specializes in cross-cultural mental health, especially during conflict and gender-based violence in extreme settings. Recently, her colleagues and herself completed a very amazing research project on investigating trauma therapeutic interventions, y'all, for gender-based violence in Afghanistan, using traditional storytelling. So here are some of approaches of that we can use to help each other overcome some of these challenges that we faced. Ayesha, welcome.
Thank you.
Should we just dive right in? Because I think that it's always important to start with the basics.
Yes.
Maybe we could just start with what perpetuates gender-based violence and who is affected.
Okay, so a simple answer is everyone is affected by gender-based violence. When we have societies there is no society in the world at the moment that is immune, where somebody is immune from gender-based violence. Gender-based violence stems ultimately from various inequalities, particularly around gender in a society. In societies where there are other factors such as conflict, poverty, corruption, then those are factors which magnify and accelerate gender-based violence. But no one is immune from gender-based violence. Often we hear a lot of the focus on women, violence against women, and there is reasons for this. Worldwide, over 35% of women will experience some form of violence in physical or sexual intimate partner violence in their lifetime. But gender-based violence affects children, and it affects boys and men as well.
Yeah, and that is true. But why do you think this is the case? Do you think that women are more affected or they're more neglected? Because when I look at these campaigns, a lot of the campaigns that go on about gender-based violence that focus on women and girls, there's always this word that we are having a voice for those who don't have a voice. And also sometimes in some communities, when I have interacted with people who work in this field, I've also worked in this field myself personally, there is sometimes that kind of, reasoning from our male counterparts that, I didn't do anything wrong. I've actually been told that this is our culture. Sometimes in some communities, they'll actually, if a woman is outspoken or, speaks her mind, they'll make a comment and say, her husband needs to discipline her. and put her in her place so that she can remember her place. So they wouldn't do the same thing for a man. So I'm just trying to understand, why do you think there is this focus? And I'm not saying that men don't experience forms of violence. I'm in agreement, total agreement, that they do, and we don't hear so much about it. But I think there must be a reason why there's this main focus on women and girls. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I agree. And gender-based violence, as I mentioned, ultimately it's a consequence of unequal gender norms within a society. And if we look around the world at the way societies are organized, they do tend to be patriarchal societies where you are got inherent gender inequality. There are lots of different factors in the examples that you just mentioned that increase perhaps the vulnerability of a woman to experience gender-based violence when the gender-based violence is structural within a society. So that means it's systematic within different layers of that society, within an individual household layer, on a community level, perhaps on a governmental level. In some countries that I work in, the policies and the laws of the country are actually positive towards women who are victimized by gender-based violence. So there are different levels there where women actually become, as you mentioned, it becomes part of the culture. I'm a little bit cautious by reducing gender-based violence to being culture. By describing it as culture, it just means that it's accepted practice or norm within a society. So that's why many societies which we are working in nowadays with gender-based violence are actually extreme settings, because the violence has become normalized and socially accepted. So that takes a lot more undoing in order to respond to that, to address those unequal gender norms.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you with that statement, because we can also, that one culture just thinks gender-based violence is good, because in every culture there's people in those communities that say it is wrong. And there are actually laws that, forbid this kind of, violence, but people just, of course, they just do it, knowing it's wrong or not knowing it's wrong, but we wouldn't go too much into that. But I just want to backtrack a little bit on the point that you made with regards to also men are neglected. And I think it's this cross-cultural word related to violence in extreme settings. There's quite a lot of violence, also that happens to men during wars. The tortures and how they're drugged, and we've seen those. If everyone has been in a conflict area, there's different forms of violence against the different genders, and I think the differences maybe are not always expressed. A man may not be raped or could be raped, but he might be, they might chop off his arms, his hands, and that's also a kind of, it's abuse, and it's a violent act. And I think when we're talking about gender-based violence, is it more on different forms of violence that are more centered or targeted towards women, and certain forms of violence that are maybe targeted towards men?
That's a good question. I think the way I would answer that is it depends on the context in which the gender-based violence is being experienced. So if I give the example of conflict, you mentioned various forms of violence. I mean, whenever there's one form of gender-based violence, there's going to be multiple forms. They don't exist in a vacuum. So even in conflict, we know that even in conflicts where sexual violence towards women is used as a strategy of war, we know that rates of domestic violence, of intimate partner violence, will still be very high, and will probably be even higher than the rates of sexual violence. It will increase during the conflict because of various factors. But I also know with the individuals that I work with, particularly asylum seekers in the UK, just one of the reasons why I'm working more around gender-based violence towards men and boys in some aspects of conflict is because in receiving their narratives and their experiences of what they've experienced, I can identify instances of what I would frame as gender-based violence, because they're acts of violence that are trying to reinforce the unequal gender norms in a society. So, for example, enforcing the way a man physically looks, to conform to certain religious ideologies, for example, being beaten if he does not. And it's interesting to see that often the men who are recounting those stories don't view it themselves as violence, because there are very narrow views about conceptions about what violence constitutes in terms of a man, that it must be physical in order for it to be violent. So I think there's a lot more experiences that are not recognized at the moment as being gender-based violence, particularly in conflict, and that that is leading to a neglected area of the population.
I absolutely agree with you. And when you were making that statement, I just thought back of an article that I read just last week, where it was in a conflict area. I'm not going to be very specific about the area, but they were actually talking about a man who had to watch while his wife and daughter were abused. Now, talk about the degree of trauma. Now, he has not been beaten up, but what he has to live, through seeing this kind of, abuse taking place, with his wife and his daughter, in my view, is horrific. But they purposefully brought him in that room as they abused the wife and the daughter for him to see. They did that purposefully. So I absolutely get your point. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's how I understand. There's so many ways trauma can take place, and gender-based violence can take place that are maybe neglected or not really focused on. And maybe we tend to focus too much on the physical. Is that correct, or is that?
I think our understanding is continuing to develop about the multiple layers of trauma that are experienced during conflict. And I think we can see that as it's only since the early 90s, really, that the sexual violence as a weapon of war has become a legal concept. And the definitions around that have increased as we know, as we've learned more about people's experiences during conflict. And certainly the example you described around the multiple trauma for that family involving the man, the woman, and the child. Part of the reason why sexual violence is operated as a strategy of war is to target the man as well as the woman. But it is a form of humiliating the man by abusing his wife, as well as other factors as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's terrible, and I'd just like us to further discuss what are some of the long-term implications on these victims, their overall health.
Yeah, I mean they're multiple. They're implications in every aspect of that individual's health and future. In terms of the physical and mental health, we know that following instances of gender-based violence, women are twice as more likely to be depressed than women who have not experienced gender-based violence. But we also know there's comorbidities that go alongside mental illness related to gender-based violence. This relates to reproductive health. Women might be more vulnerable to acquiring HIV. Other forms of health conditions might be neglected because of the circumstances in which they are living in. So we know that there's vast physical consequences as well as mental health consequences as well. I still think that we need to understand more about the processes of trauma, particularly in conflict as well. In some of the conflicts we're seeing now, they are protracted conflicts. They're conflicts where they are very much premised on identity. I was attending a talk last night by Nadia Murad, who was a young woman who was enslaved by Daesh, ISIS, as a Yazidi woman in Iraq. And she mentioned how she was born in the heart of the crimes that were committed against her, that the war came to her. It was occurred in her home. So there's, if you think about trauma and conflict, how it's relating to identity and home, some of the two crucial aspects of that make up the self of who we are. We can really try to understand then some of the long-term implications that has on how people are going to experience life in the future.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think you heard you listened briefly to the clip I played. It was a TEDx clip by Jessica Deere, and she was talking about cultural informed approach to mental health. Mm-hmm. And we do know cultures are different, and you do a lot of work in this area, you know, of trauma, therapeutic interventions, and you actually incorporate cross-cultural mental health. Can you just give us a little bit of a better understanding of why it's important for us to gain more awareness of the differences that exist within different cultures, whether in a conflict area, you know, or an extremely, you know, tense or war zone that would affect us, and why this approach of having a more culturally informed approach is important?
Okay, thank you. That's an important question, and one that much of my work centers on. I prefer to think of it as cross-cultural pluralism rather than cross-cultural differences. Often we tend to think about culture in terms of when somebody or something is differentiated from us, and I think that can be quite a negative or harmful reduction of culture in some ways. The reason why I work a lot with cross-cultural mental health is because mental health, this is a huge debate about whether mental health psychiatry can be universally applied in terms of its diagnoses and categories. But what we can understand from some of the work that's been done in medical anthropology, for example, is that the lived experience of different conditions are going to vary around the world. And particularly my work is looking at cross-cultural aspects of trauma. So in that sense, I think about culture as the way that we make sense of the world around us. And trauma is when something becomes traumatic when our worldview becomes disrupted, when when there's a rupture in our worldview and things no longer make sense to us. So culture becomes a really important tool in trying to make sense of what's going on. And I think when we're trying to think about trauma recovery or trauma therapeutic interventions, we need to understand around those concepts. Sometimes culture is harmful, sometimes it can be a positive resource, but we still need to understand the way that somebody is perceiving their self and also their world around them. So that was what some of my work in Afghanistan was around, in trying to understand the women who we were working with, their views around suffering. How did they perceive suffering?
Yeah, amazing. Your work is really, really impeccable. Before we go on, and my next question would be, what are some trauma therapeutic interventions for gender-based violence, and maybe in relation to your work in Afghanistan? But before we go into that question, I'd like to bring in my co-host, Shaz, who I can see is on the line. And also, before Shaz comes on the line, I'd like to also, invite listener with the area code 201 and the last 4 digits 6432 who has pushed 1 on the keypad. If you'd like to join in, feel free to jump in, okay? But in the meantime, Shaz, would you like to come in and say hello? I think I see you here on the line.
Good evening. Good evening, Dr. Ayesha Ahmad. It's our pleasure to have you on the show. It's really great what you're doing. I understand that you're really working with these people because I'm a translator. When I go out and translate for people, I also have these people from basically a lot of them are from Afghanistan. Okay. Because they have experienced a lot of things, seen a lot of things, and they're actually traumatized. And like you're saying, if it's the women, if the girls, they come up here, they don't have their parents, they don't know actually what happened with them. So I know how, it's really hard for them, what you're mentioning with women, with the, depression and everything. Mm-hmm. So, So it's really, it's really true what you're saying, that it's really hard that when they have experienced different things, through their journey or whatever it has happened to them, in their lives. So
yes, I think you're exactly right that the story of trauma is continuous. There is rarely one instance of trauma.
it feels like sometimes when I can also see that it's not something that just going to go away, even though they will get the help that they need. And especially it depends, like, you know, what they have been involved with. But you can really tell that it's not something, maybe it will just stay with them, you know, for the rest of their lives, even though they will get help from doctors and everything. So it's really amazing what you're doing.
Thank you, and likewise.
Thank you.
Okay. Shaz, do you have any other question for Ayesha?
No, I mean, no, my question was just that, no, not for now, right now.
Okay,
but,
that's
no,
fine.
But,
Okay, Ayesha, we'll just go on to, maybe we can go on and discuss my next topic, and that is the trauma therapeutic interventions that you you used to, you know, during your amazing work in Afghanistan to address the issue of gender-based violence. If we could touch on that just a little bit, tell us a little bit about how that worked and how it went, so that we can get some best practices as well.
Okay, thank you. So I'm a researcher, not a clinician, but my interest was in thinking about what would be a cross-cultural valid approach to thinking about trauma related to gender-based violence in a context like Afghanistan, which is a context of chronic conflict, not just armed conflict, but other forms of conflict as well. Some of the harshest gender inequalities in the world, as well as various other health inequalities as well. And particularly in the context of where we were working, which were with women who've experienced particularly intimate partner violence. But in this context, it is the perpetrators are not just the husband, they are often the female members of the husband's family as well. And it's not possible for a woman to really divorce and have an independent life. So there is a situation where women might go to a shelter for a temporary amount of time, but will either have to remain there indefinitely or will have to return to their family at a later point. So I was considering, well, what would trauma therapy look like in this context where the trauma is continuous, where the conflict is chronic, and where there may be very different notions of suffering. We often see very strong rhetorics and narratives around particularly Afghan women or Muslim women from other countries about being very, as victims, as being silent and very passive. And I wanted to try and deconstruct that image of women and to think about storytelling in this context. So from this cultural background, storytelling is extremely a rich resource. It has a lot of power within a society, to the extent that during the Taliban regime, women were banned from reciting or being involved in any way with poetry. So part of addressing gender-based violence in this context, I felt it was important to address it on an individual level, but also on a social transformation level. So that's why my colleagues and I, we worked on developing an intervention. So this was a very small project to do some life narrative interviews and hold some focus groups. So we were looking at the role of exploring stories that have helped shape that woman's identity throughout her life, rather than asking direct questions about her violence. So some of the other dominant forms of trauma therapy, such as narrative exposure therapy, rely on recounting the details of the trauma. In this context, I felt it was unethical and it wasn't culturally applicable to do that. So that's why I looked at more using the traditional storytelling and bringing in Persian poets, female poets, some very famous poets who've got strong stories themselves of gender-based violence, such as Rabia Balkhi from quite a long time ago now, but the legend has it from, I think it's something around the 10th century. She lived, she was a poet, and when she was imprisoned by her brother because of who he found out that she was in love with, and he cut the jugular vein of her and imprisoned her in a bathroom. But she continued to write poems on the bathroom wall with her own blood until she died. And this is a legend that's lasted for hundreds of years, and she's still a very strong figure in Persian poetry. So we use some of her work.
Persian, Iranian.
Persian, yes.
Okay.
Well, what is now Iran? Yes.
Go on.
So we had focus groups where we used some of her writing or her story, and we had reflection around this, as well as some more modern day female poets as well. So opportunities to develop other stories, new stories, for the women that were that include violence, for more options of their identity.
Wow, I mean that's very intense. I mean, Shaz, you're breaking off a little bit, Ayesha. Hello.
Yeah, no, I'm still here, but I could hear the connection was kind of like breaking up.
Yeah, Ayesha, you kind of broken off. Hello. I'm not sure, Ayesha, if you can hear us. Oh, that's unfortunate. We can barely hear you. Would you like to call back in, Ayesha, if you can hear us?
Now?
Yes, but you're breaking off really bad. Would you like to call back in?
Okay, I'll end the call and call back in.
Oh, now you're good. Now we can hear you just fine.
No, it's okay. Okay,
now it's
I'm not sure what happened.
Yeah,
okay,
I don't know if you could hear me, but I was just about to say that Shaz was just saying, I don't know if you could hear her, but she was just saying that she's heard about the movie. Shaz, I'm not sure what the movie is. You've heard about the Persian woman who
Yeah, I have heard about it. I don't remember so much about it, but it seems very familiar, and I have heard about it. And I think, actually, I also saw, I have seen them, they made a, which I remember, and it's a very long time ago. I remember briefly something, what you were saying about this thing, so that's kind of interesting. but it's very strong about this lady there. I mean, that you're actually telling about. But Iranian, they do have a lot of poets and poetry.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to use it, as it's a rich cultural resource, and often the culture is seen in a very negative light because of the associations of the violence towards women. But we wanted to draw on a resource that is available, that actually can continue in a positive way and that's sustainable as well.
Yeah, Ayesha, correct me if I'm wrong, but this action, this heinous action that the brother did to this woman, what's her name? Her name again? Please tell us her name again.
The poet is Rabia Balkhi. So it's from the 10th
and the woman who was abused by her husband, by her boyfriend. Her brother.
Yes, this is the poet, the female poet.
Oh, she's the poet as well.
Yes, she's the poet. Yes, and it's
was
a legend.
Okay, and this is because she was in love with somebody. And has this anything to do with kind of a forced marriage setting or an honor killing setting where she was not allowed to pick her husband? Why was it such a big issue that she loved somebody? It was
the 10th century, and so it's constructed around a legend. But it was because she was in love with a slave who was working for her family. Some kind of royal family, I believe. And because of who she's with, and her brother found out, the brother imprisoned the slave, and he also imprisoned his sister as well, and then attempted to kill his sister by cutting her vein. And when the slave who she was in love with, he actually escaped from where he was being held in prison. But when he found out about Rabia having died by this point, he went to the governor's office and he assassinated the brother and then committed suicide. So it's a very tragic love affair. But the example of poetry and how important it was for her to continue to write poetry up until the point until she passed away, I think that is very symbolic.
Yeah, I like, well, this is just my 2 cents, y'all. And thank you, guests, and all our listeners who are saying you absolutely love Ayesha. Ayesha, you're getting quite a bit of love there. They're saying you're so smart, so intelligent. Of course, these are our guests. What did you expect?
Thank you.
We have intelligent women on our show, and I will not ask y'all what you think of me and Shad, but anyway, we'll just take that later. We have a guest in the house, so y'all need to, I'm glad that you'll love our guest. We absolutely love her, and y'all need to have your pen and pad, because, y'all, we always want you all to go and change the world, so we hope that you're getting something out of this.
Of course.
But that being said, Ayesha, I wanted to actually talk a little further about this storytelling and the poetry approach, because I think this is so fabulous. Because I had a discussion with a woman who is quite popular in Kenya, and she also has done some really good interviews on BBC. And we had a chat, and she has experienced, different forms of gender-based violence. And she said something that every time people interview her and ask her questions about her story, she has to relive it. And she doesn't feel that this is fair. And I like the way you put it. You said, this is, what did you call it? You said, this is, you almost put it like it's unjust, to make a woman go through the whole process again. Yeah, ethical, exactly. And I totally agree with you that it's absolutely unethical, because a lot of women who've gone through this, every time you ask them to retell their experience, it's like you drag them through the whole motions, And so this approach of storytelling, I think, could be beneficial to a lot of communities, especially, like you said, the history of poetry in certain cultures, which already I think they will embrace much quicker, because it's already part of the culture, and they can use this, as a therapeutic approach. But I also think in places like Africa, which is already also a huge storytelling culture, this would also be a really good approach that could be, embraced in those communities, because, over years we've learned a lot through storytelling.
Yes, so I mean, you're exactly right.
Interesting approach, a broad culture. It's not always, what do you call it, the standard, psychiatry approach. And on this note, maybe you can tell us about the cultural differences in people accepting mental health, because I know in Africa, nobody has mental health problems. Nobody. Everybody is perfect. You don't have what mental health? Go to church and pray about it. You'll be fine, Or don't talk about it. Just remember, just be happy, smile, laugh. So I think there's some mental health has also some hidden taboos in it. But please correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not the expert on mental health, but this is what I just see from different interactions. There's a taboo. There are cultures of not acknowledging mental health or even accepting that it exists. What do we do in this case?
Yes, I mean, to take it from the beginning of what you were mentioning around storytelling, we are hoping to expand our work. We are applying for more funding at the moment to continue the work in various other countries, such as Iraq, Kurdistan, Turkey, and also South Africa, because of the relevance of storytelling as part of the culture, as you described it. What we also, what you mentioned about mental health in terms of the taboo, I think it comes down to different understandings around serious. So in our societies, particularly Western societies, if we can define them in that way, we have a very dualistic view of the mind and the body. We can thank Descartes for that several hundred years ago. But in other societies, there is a much more integrated view of the self, of the mind and the body. And that's why you might see in other societies people express stress by describing physical symptoms. Mental illnesses, things that differentiate somebody as different from the rest of society. There are lots of taboos around this. I particularly work in the area of culture and mental health, and there are many human rights violations taking place due to various interpretations of individuals suffering from what, from a Western perspective, might be diagnosable as a psychiatric disorder, such as psychosis, for example, that might be interpreted as being possessed by a spirit in other societies, and then the treatments around that are quite violent, and they can cause serious injuries, sometimes even death. So there's lots of different understandings around mental health. I think universally there is stigma still around mental health as well, but the degree to which that is harmful is going to be dependent on the different cultural interpretation of mental illness.
Yeah, and what is the role of religion? Because I'll take an example of Kenya, which is a very Christian country, and
yes.
Most churches also have counselors, and their counseling is done from a Christian context. So the Bible and the approach of the Bible is incorporated. Probably even 90% is incorporated in the therapy.
Yes.
Is that helpful? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah.
I don't know if it's the same in the Middle East, whether people incorporate, Islam or other religions. I know in parts where they practice Hinduism and Buddhism, that is also incorporated in different forms of therapy. Karma and these other,
ideally, religion should be a space of compassion and healing, but it's not always implemented. Sometimes because of political factors and ideologies and extremism. So sometimes religion is not healing and it's not compassionate. But often in certain societies, religious leaders are the gatekeepers to communities, and they are the authority figures, particularly in areas where there is poor health infrastructure, where there is, in some countries, for example, in Sierra Leone, there's only one psychiatrist in the whole country. So you can understand why traditional healers or religious leaders are much more part of the health approach, particularly in cases where it might not be somebody suffering or distress might not be viewed as a health issue, but might be seen as a spiritual issue or religious aspect. So I think there's potential for religion to have an important role, but like anything, there's nuance with it. And it's interesting to see psychiatry and mental health in countries such as the UK, where psychiatry and mental health has been criticized as perhaps being too medicalized, and reducing the experience of mental illness to something that's more of a pathology. So I'm currently working on a book chapter with a colleague of mine on the role of religion and spirituality in mental health, of trying to demedicalize mental health in some ways to develop it more as a spiritual encounter. But this is controversial within a biomedical framework of psychiatry. So it really depends on the context, but the ethos always has to be on healing rather than harm. And that's the balance.
But again, that's the thing. What is harm? Because I know in a religion context where people believe in karma, they will accept certain treatment, whether it's the most heinous crime committed against them. They might just say, "This is my karma," and they will not even bother to seek for any help because this is my karma. It's like a docile kind of conclusive acceptance that this is the path that my life has taken. Not realizing that this is not the path your life has taken. Someone has actually violated you, and you can do something about it. And if they are in an environment where they have somebody who believes in that, completely, and this person is in a position of authority, do you think that that could hinder them going to get, some kind of support? Or do you think that there are ways that, because you've done a lot of extensive research, are there ways that these communities, and that goes across the board, not just, Hinduism or, religions where they have come, but across the board, all the religions, all kinds, do you think that there's a way to blend the solutions where you don't alienate the religion because it plays a very important role in people's lives, and you don't alienate the, psychiatry or, the medical, area,
Yes.
part of it? Is there a way that these two can kind of mash up and blend, whereby, they both are working in cohesion to actually, like you so nicely put it, result in healing?
I think what's important in some of the examples you just described is to understand what people's expectations are shaped on the resources of what is around them. So it's not just around mental health, it's also around physical health. If somebody has a terminal illness, for example, where they know they are very sick, they might not seek physical help because they know that they are going to eventually die, and it might be expensive for them to receive treatment. So I think it's really dependent on what an individual's expectations are, and I think that having that now mental health is on the global health agenda. It's a priority in the way that we develop in health systems around the world. Mental health has to be part of primary health care, has to be part of the health system infrastructure, that we cannot have any form of health or development of a country without having good mental health of the population. So I think when we now in societies that have weaker or more fragile health systems, as they will continue to develop, hopefully with the right direction from their governments and international work as well, that there is going to be increased expectations of the population in terms of when they are suffering, how that suffering can be mediated. And perhaps they might understand it or channel it through a religious discourse, but there's combinations. I would assume, just from the religions that I am familiar with already, that healing is important in all religions. So it's not incompatible with accepting treatment of other forms.
Yeah, and it's good that you mentioned the financial part of it, because somebody in the chat just had been typing, ask her to talk about affordability and accessibility.
Yeah.
Because people in conflict are not able to access a lot of these resources. No. That was the way they put it. Mm-hmm.
Yes, I think
and accessibility, especially in extreme conflict areas. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's why humanitarian mental health in particular is so challenging, because of the delivery and of working in fragile, insecure, emergency, acute situations where there might be other health needs that are prioritized. But in the research that's been done around mental health, we know that there's multi-sectoral approaches needed, that there's going to be different stages of humanitarian mental health. One of the initial stages that needs to be undertaken is around psychosocial support, particularly in trying to secure the person's immediate needs around them. The poverty, I think that is often it's there, but it's not understood always about how much of a preventative factor that is in somebody accessing other forms of healthcare that might be less harmful than some traditional forms of treatment.
Yeah, and Tracy, welcome in the chat. Tracy has a very good question. She says that how much of the politics is involved in providing this treatment to people?
I think that's an area that I'm increasingly becoming interested in, and also, if I'm honest, be quite dismayed in as well. I think it's difficult without naming governments, but I think it
no, we don't want to do that.
Yes. It can be quite difficult. Mental health is related to development, and there can be, particularly when we're thinking about gender aspects as well, that there might be certain reasons why certain genders are continue to be oppressed in certain societies, and why mental health might be used as almost as a strategy of violence as well. For example, if a woman discloses an account of violence, then she might be just diagnosed as being depressed or mad or crazy because she's mentally ill. So mental health can be used in negative ways as well. I think because the biomedical framework or even the biopsychosocial model of mental health or psychiatry is Western dominated, there can be resistance from other societies, other countries that have, post-colonial, post-imperialistic societies, where there's strong historical, political discourses which might actually resent that. I mean, there's certain strong critics of global mental health who I admire very much, who criticize some of the universality of mental health as being another form of colonialism, of trying to understand everybody in the same way. So there's lots of political issues there around mental health development globally.
Yeah. Tracy, are you happy with that answer? Excellent. You hate politics? They don't take care of people?
True. Very true.
Tracy, you should come on the show and tell us, and share your view next time. Hit us up. We'll invite you on the show. But we have 5 minutes left on the show. And so any last questions? Shaz, any last questions? Any last, anything you would like Dr. Ahmad to tell us or to answer for you all? Go ahead and do that. Everybody else in the chat, any last questions? I know there's so many questions. She answered some as she was going along, especially the situation in Afghanistan. But y'all can also listen to, we had a show where Monday, we had a guest, Mandy Sangaro, talked about the issue of forced marriage and honor killings. So you can go and listen to that and get a little bit of more insights on that. But she has kind of touched on it because, of course, these things are not happening in isolation. Okay. So any last questions, because we'll slowly have to wind up. We hope that Ayesha, you would love to come back to our show. You're always welcome because we have so many questions, and as you can tell, 4 minutes is not enough. We'd like to go on and on. But if nobody is posing a question or wants to make a last statement, I have 1,001 questions, just not enough time. So I'll go ahead and ask you, what can we do? How can we get involved? Easy breezy. I know people don't want it to be too complicated. They want it easy breezy. If you can do a 1, 2, 3 step, maybe 4, 5 steps, we would absolutely be honored.
Yeah, I mean, the main thing, the only thing it might not be such a surprise given my work on storytelling, but I believe in writing and communication of words, narratives that might be suppressed, that might have been hidden. I think this is the most important thing we can do. And if we look at the mental health research around conflict, there's so little that's been done around civilians' experiences of conflict. We don't hear those voices. So I think the world needs to know about how people suffer from war much more than we know now. So those of us who can put forward those narratives of any forms of trauma, suffering that our parents might have gone, our grandparents, our friends, then I think those stories need to be written. So I would really encourage people to write as much as they can, and if I'm very happy for people to contact me as well if they wish to.
Okay, please go ahead and share all your details, where we can reach you, how we can contact you, and where we can find more information about your work. Perhaps people can support in different ways. Maybe share an article. You never know.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Well, I can share my Twitter, which is @academic Ayesha. And my email address, if that would help, is all lowercase. It's a.ahmad@ucl.ac.uk, and you can find my Facebook profile following that email address as well. So there's a few ways there you can get in contact with me.
Perfect. So you all reach out, because you really never know. You never know. A lot of these things are kind of very taboo topics. They're secreted because they're associated with a lot of shame. And so people sometimes might like to keep a lot of these things private. So what we like to share over here is, when you're having dinner, just share some of this information, because someone might not raise their hand and say, hey, I'm dealing with this, but just that you've talked about it, they might get an idea of how they can address it in their own privacy. Okay, y'all? That's how we do it over here. You don't have to go out with a placard and say, here I am, you have to take this pill. No, just talk about the topic, share information, say, I heard on this show that, writing is a good way to deal with trauma. They might do it in their own privacy, not talk about it, but you'll start to see them, shine and glow a little bit better. Yeah. Shaz, real quick, we have 1 minute on the show if you want to have any last words.
Yeah, I just want to say that, again, it's really amazing what you're doing, and then I also know it's a very hard area to work with. Yeah. Because everybody has different issues, they have experienced different, things in their lives. Like Faith said, that it's not something that people like to say maybe openly, but it's more private, because again, what they have experienced, what has happened to them, how they have been tortured, and so on. So it's really amazing what you do. And then again, it's just that they need to talk about it, and also feel comfortable to tell their story to somebody that they can feel that they can trust and open up to.
Thank you very much, Shaz. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Ayesha, once more. You're most welcome to come back. I hope you would love to come back.
I would love to. Thank you very much. You made me think a lot about other things as well tonight, so thank you.
Thank you so much. It's an absolute honor. Our guests absolutely love you. Our Twitter friends are saying, please bring her back. We absolutely love her. She's a... Okay, they just called you, they said black women rock. Okay, we don't. But she's a woman who rocks.
Thank you.
We will deliver the message, to all our black sisters, black rock sisters. Yes, Ayesha Ahmad is a black woman who rocks. Okay, y'all. So Ayesha, there you have it. We absolutely love you, and keep doing your work. Stay strong. We love your resilience. We love your passion, and we're absolutely honored. To all our listeners, for those of you who are joining us, caller, is your hand up, caller? Last 201? Okay. Okay. So we'll just head out right now. Anybody who's joining us right now, we're about to head out. We'd love to hang out with you all night, but we cannot do that. So go and listen to the archives, and don't forget, you can share this audio. It's absolutely fine. And get in touch with Ayesha. Share your stories. Use fiction if that works for you. It absolutely is fine. And keep talking. Keep the dialogue. Let's keep talking about it. Everybody, we love you all, and we have to say goodbye, Ayesha.
Thank you. Good night. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you for hanging out with us. The rest of you, go on and do what we ask you on every show. Go and change the world. Bye-bye.
I'll be a bad man today. I'll be good. I'll be good. And I'll love the world like I should. Yeah. I'll be good. I'll be good for all of the time that I never could.